Got a lot of Tony nominations. We won 2, then we closed 9 months later.
Can we talk about that? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Game Changers, your backstage pass to the innovators transforming Broadway. Today, I am so excited. We have a very special guest, Tony Award winner, Pulitzer Prize winner, multi-award winner, Michael R. Jackson. Prior to Pulitzer Prize, prior to Tony Award, can you take me back and indulge me in sharing where you're from and were you always pursuing writing and composing?
So I'm from Detroit, Michigan, originally, born in the city proper. I was very involved in the arts from like a very young age. I played piano. I sang in an all-city Black classical choir. I played piano at church. I took dance class, had some child acting that I was doing. And then I also wrote poetry and fiction.
Love.
And I sort of did all of that, or I did a lot of that all the way through my senior year of high school. Sort of my initial dream was to be an actor, but sort of at age 13, I was like, I'm leaving the business. And then
You
I
had
really
enough.
became interested in writing. And that's what I sort of pursued all the way through high school. And sort of my dream there was I thought I was going to write for soap operas because I was a big soap opera fanatic. And I watched
Which ones?
almost all of them. So I grew up on Days of Our Lives in Another World. But then as I got older, I started watching Guiding Light, One Night to Live, and General Hospital.
Nice.
I was sort of determined that I was going to become the head writer of One Night to Live at some point. And so that's what
At what age did this happen?
this was in my teen years. So
A
I'd say
really common teenage dream.
yeah,
Cool,
16,
cool.
17. And I came to New York to go to NYU. And I was on that track. I'm going to get a soap opera job. But I sort of got bitten by the theater bug again, but this time from the playwriting side, because that's what I was sort of studying in school alongside my screenwriting classes. And I sort of fell into theater and musical theater, which I loved because I did it as a kid.
Yeah.
And also my mom and I used to go and see shows and I would come on tour through Detroit. And I just got pulled into theater more and more and more. And I didn't get the soap opera job. And then I just found myself purely on the theater path.
Was that for lack of trying or?
When I graduated from college, I graduated a semester earlier than I sort of thought I was going to. And so I suddenly was like, oh gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. So I was like, I'm just going to apply for jobs. I'm going to apply for grad schools, and whichever one hits, I'm going to do
What's
that.
happening?
And so I applied for a job at CBS Daytime to
Nice.
be an executive assistant. I didn't get the job, but if I had gotten the job, I would not have gone to NYU to study musical theater writing, and I would not be writing musicals today.
Wild.
Period. Because I just literally applied sort of on a whim.
What?
I mean, I love musicals, but I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. So
That's
I'm just going to do it.
unreal.
So I was very much a two roads diverge in a Yellowwood kind of situation. And then I went into the NYU grad musical theater writing program, and it just was the perfect.
Which was
fit
one
for
of
me.
many things you were pursuing at
That's
that
right.
moment. That's wild.
Yeah, I applied to some other grad schools. I didn't get to any other ones other than that one. 18-year-olds going to art school, I think, is not always the best thing because you don't really have much life experience
To pull from.
And then you go to these programs and they're very much about sort of pumping out, whoever they think is the most talented or whatever.
Or marketable.
Or whatever. And I took from it what I could, but it wasn't until I went to grad school and was a little bit older that I started to really have something to say. I would say my grad school experience, I think, was more fruitful than my undergrad, though I did take what I could from undergrad.
For high school students who think they want to be writers, if they shouldn't go to art school, do you have any ideas about what they should do?
I mean, I'm not going to say
Don't go to art school.
don't go to art school.
Sure.
I mean, I just am saying
For you.
looking back on it, I had such tunnel vision about it that I didn't really think through what I was doing. I just sort of flew by the seat of my pants. And I don't think that that's a good idea. I think that if you're going to go to art school, you should really do it intentionally and really soak up all the education that you can and see as much as you can and really understand that you're pursuing a vocation, and it's a hard one. That's another reason why it's sort of you can always go to grad school later if you want. And so it might be best to sort of educate yourself without all the expense.
When you went to NYU, was that your first time to New York or had you visited previously?
I had been one time previously because when I was in high school, I went on an exchange trip to Israel
Hmm.
and our orientation was in New York.
Did you see shows?
Not that time. I didn't see a show in New York until I went to college.
In Detroit, when you were seeing tours, was there any production that really stood out to you, like a
Oh,
formative?
yes. So there was a tour of this not particularly well-known musical, although it won the Tony for Best Musical in 1974, called Raisin, which is a
Mhm.
musical adaptation of the play A Raisin in the Sun. And I just went nuts for it. I loved it. Score is so good. So I really loved that. And then this wasn't in Detroit technically, but my mom took me and my grandmother to Toronto one weekend and we saw Phantom of the Opera and Showboat. And
Mm,
Showboat was the one. Like
I
it's in
love
my top,
that.
it's like in my top 5 shows. I know it backwards and forwards.
Still?
Still love it.
Wow. Favorite
Love it.
song?
Probably Bill, which is a trunk song from the
It's
show,
gorgeous.
but also like You Are Love.
Oh
It's
my
so
god.
beautiful and like
Make Believe is
Make Believe
beautiful.
and like Life on a Wicked Stage makes me
Oh,
laugh and
yeah.
like Misery. I love the song Misery.
It's so good.
Also, Why Do I Love You? I like the Parky
That
version.
I do too. I do too. It's gorgeous though. That
Yeah.
score is
It's so good. Like I
stunning.
love that score.
I
I
do
love
too.
it. I love it.
I
I
do
love it. I
too.
love
Do
it.
you wanna
Unironically.
do you wanna rewrite it?
I would love to adapt it, but it's in the public domain now, and I think a lot of people have already started doing it. So now I'm like,
That doesn't mean that you can't.
I know, but
You love it. You may be like among the
maybe,
best equipped humans to do that.
maybe one day I'll really dig into it. But it's
I want to
just
see your
I think a lot
showboat.
of people are doing it.
Okay, well, I advocate for the Michael R. Jackson showboat just
Sure,
for the
sure,
record.
sure.
Raisin, Showboat, Phantom, all formative, but you were retired as a performer, weren't sure what you were pursuing. Life chose sort of for you to a little bit of an extent. You have graduated from NYU, and what happens?
I just sort of was out in the world. I like a friend of my dear friend, my best friend, Kisha, she got a live-in nanny job in Tribeca, and she had been living out in the middle of nowhere, Jamaica, Queens, in her brother-in-law's aunt's house.
Oh my God.
And I needed somewhere to live. So we arranged for me to move into that house when she moved out. And so I lived all the way at the very end of the E and the F train and then I had to take a bus or a gypsy cab to where I lived, which is like an hour and a half commute
Wow.
every day.
Holy.
But I was only paying like $400 a month to
Oh
live
my
in the
God.
top floor of this bungalow style house. So I just lived out
Wild.
there in nowhere Jamaica, Queens. And I just was sitting in that room and I would just go, like, what am I gonna do?
Hmm.
Like, what am I gonna do? Like I had no plans. I was not ready. And so I just started writing this sort of like fill the void. And I was applying for jobs and everything. And I would commute into the city where I was ushering at the New
Minskoff?
Amsterdam Theater
Oh,
when the Lion King was there. And then a couple of years into that, they moved out to the Minskoff and then Mary Poppins came in. And I stayed there for a year of Mary Poppins. And I just did some of everything. But I was writing this monologue called Why I Can't Get Work, which would eventually become the sort of source material for what would become A Strange Loop, the book of it.
but obviously that was like a journey from that moment
Oh yeah.
until. So can you break down a little bit of like those road stops of like how it went from being in your room in Jamaica, Queens to Broadway?
So yes, I had written this monologue, and then there was a youth theater festival that a friend of mine had got me involved in at the Labyrinth Theater Company, and I had that monologue, "Why I Can't Get Work," performed one year as part of the festival.
How long is this monologue?
The monologue is probably 20 minutes, 25
Okay.
minutes maybe, and it got performed in that festival. And then I can't remember if I was in grad school by then or not. I think I probably was. So I was studying musical theater writing. And then in the program, I went into the program only as a book writer
Hmm.
and aspiring lyricist because I had never had written lyrics before.
Wow, 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 wow.
And so I sort of studied lyric writing all through the first year. By the end of the first year, I had a sense of song form.
Hmm.
And that's important because as a teenager, I used to try to write songs, but I didn't understand
Structure.
lyrical structure at all. And so I could never figure out how to get the music and the lyrics to go together. But once I like was studying it in grad school, suddenly the musical ideas I had somewhere to go. And so at the end of the first year, we had a class with one of our sort of visiting professor teachers, this guy named Mike Reed, who is a songwriter who wrote the song "I Can't Make You Love Me" by Bonnie Raitt. He was a writing collaborator of our our department. And he gave us an assignment that said if you're a lyricist who's never written music or a composer who's never written a lyric and you want to try it, go for it. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to try to put the music and the lyrics together on my own. And so I went away, and the song that came out of that was this song called Memory Song, which would eventually work its way into A Strange Loop. Though at that time, it was just a standalone song for me, like a singer-songwriter kind of style song. And I performed it in class, and it just went over really well with my class and with my teachers. And I was encouraged to continue writing my own music, even though for my second year thesis project, I was going to be paired with a composer. If anybody had said in that class, this song isn't any good, or given me any sort of negative feedback, I just wouldn't have continued writing music like at all.
Crazy.
And so because I was strongly encouraged to continue writing my own music and developing my musical voice, I kept doing it.
Wow.
I would let people listen to songs, and most of the songs I tended to write at that time tended to be kind of personal. The themes of those songs overlapped with a lot of what the monologue was. And there was a director who I was working with at the time who had directed some short plays of mine, had read the monologue and had heard some of the songs, and she wondered what it would be like if we started to try to put them together. And so we started working on that, and then that piece turned into this sort of one-man show version called Fast Food Town, which is the name of a song that I had written. And then I performed that one-man show at this place called Ars Nova in New York. There's probably like 20 people probably attended. Two walked out in the middle of it.
What year is this?
This was 2006.
Okay.
Came away from that experience glad that I had done it, but I was like, I don't want this to be a one-man show. I don't want to be in it. I want it to be like a musical, like and albeit a probably unconventional one, but I wanted it to have the kind of integrity that I saw in musicals that I liked. And so I went away and then continued to sort of work on the structure of the piece, and it started to morph again, and that's when it turned into what would be called A Strange Loop. And from there, it was just a lot of years on and off, on and off, on and off. I met my director, Stephen Brackett, and sort of in that period, I asked him to direct a version of, because I only at that point had ever heard songs in a concert, or I would do a book only reading of the script, and I never had put them together. And so Stephen directed the first version of it, was that where we put them together. And from there, Stephen's had this really brilliant idea that also was, for me, a signal that I should keep working with him on it, was that the casting conceit of casting it with what we were saying at that time was all Black and gay men in it. And that was really an exciting premise for me. And so I started writing more toward that concept. And the piece then continued to sort of grow and grow and grow as we got little opportunities to work on it over the years. Very much on and off. It was not a consistent journey.
When did like producers enter the mix and it become a thing that was not just a project between you and Stephen?
So what happened was, Steve and I did that first workshop in 2012. He had directed some concerts of mine that had some of the songs in it before.
Is that how you met him?
Yes. So
okay.
I did a concert at Joe's Pub called So Fucking Gay
Amazing.
in 2010. And he directed that concert. And one of the songs in that show is a song called Periodically, which Stephen was very drawn to. And it was part of the thing that made him suggest the casting conceit of it when we worked together in 2012 on putting the whole thing together. Because he saw John Andrew Morrison perform that song and was very moved by the performance, and he thought that would be interesting if we sort of made that a global concept. So then we did the workshop in 2012, and then In 2015, I was approached by Shakina Nafak, who is the founding artistic director of Musical Theater Factory. And she was just starting the factory at that time, which is a hub for development of musical theater away from any sort of critical or commercial considerations. And so she asked me if there was anything I wanted to develop in the inaugural writers group. And I said, well, I have this musical that I've been working on and off. It's under my bed for many years. So I brought it into the writers group. And then she got some feedback. And then she thought it would be good if we put it up, if we like did a workshop of it, like the whole thing. And so then I called Steven, and then we pulled together some actors, including John Andrew, who had been singing the sort of one of the big songs in the show since like 2006, 7.
Wow.
And we did a workshop or a presentation of it. And that was sort of when I think certain people in the industry started to pay attention, particularly Kent Nicholson, who at that time was the music theater producer at Playwrights Horizons. He was sort of keeping an eye on the piece, and I just kept working on it. Then I got an opportunity to present some songs of it at 54 Below at a concert.
We're no longer in Jamaica, Queens.
By that point, I had long moved out of Jamaica, Queens, and I was living in Washington Heights.
And no longer ushering.
I got fired or not asked back for ushering in 2008.
Okay. And the year that we're in now, like workshop, is what year?
So to give like a little
Forgive me.
timeline, 2000. So I usher from 2003 to 2008.
Okay.
And also worked various other jobs
Always.
on and off. And then I flyer for Rock of Ages at the TKTS Triangle the summer of 2008. 2008. And then I get hired as a temp to perm position at an ad agency in 2009.
Wow.
And then I work at that ad agency for 5 years until 2014.
Wow.
And so in between that, I'm writing, I'm putting things up when I can. So 2012 was in the middle of that. So 2015 is when I did the MTF, Musical Theater Factory reading workshop. And then in 2016, Jennifer Ashby Tepper at Fine Sciences or Below invites Strange Loop to do a concert reading along with a lot of other shows. And so Steve and I together this big concert reading of A Strange Loop that went really, really well. And it was at that point that Playwrights Horizons formally asked us to do a presentation at Playwrights Horizons for then artistic director Tim Sandford. And so Steve and I pulled those actors together. There was a bunch of actors who had done the concert version, but we pulled together the core to do the presentation at Playwrights Horizons. And so then in November of 2016, we did presentation at Playwrights Horizons. We did the reading the day that Trump was elected.
Oh my God.
And it was a really interesting day because everybody was in sort of this like dark mood about it.
Yeah.
But we just sort of had been working on the show all that week. And the show has nothing to do with politics or Trump or anything like that. But there was something about, I think, the boldness and this sort of like in your face kind of, and a lot of the people who had been invited just had no idea
what they were walking into.
They were into it. Just were like, oh God, Trump's elected, what we're gonna do. It just was an oddly like very cathartic and emotional thing, I think, for everybody in the room. And from there was someone who Stephen had worked with, this guy named Michael Walkup, who is the artistic director of Page 73. My then agent had invited some commercial producers, one of whom was this woman named Barbara Whitman. And Mike's sort of mandate at Page 73 is to help playwrights get their first off-Broadway production. And Barbara had like a long history of developing musicals for Broadway. And the show itself is kind of just, even in the form of it and the sort of content of it, was sort of a downtown show with uptown ambitions. And so what ended up happening was that everybody was very loved the show, but was too afraid to produce it. And as Barbara tells it, she got mad that no one would do anything with it. And so she decided that the best thing she thought she could do to help the show was to option it. And so she and Mike sort of paired their forces for us to try to produce the show. We did a little bit more work on it, and then we did a big industry presentation like 9 months later.
Okay.
And from there, Playwrights Horizons offered to do the show in their season.
Amazing.
And then like a year later, we did the show at Playwrights Horizons off Broadway. It was a big hit for them.
Saw it, loved it.
Thank you. The Great Plague of 2020
Heard of it. Yes.
Prior to that, Barbara had approached me to ask if we wanted to try to go to Broadway, you know?
Yeah. What was your vibe at that time?
So at that time, I had never been particularly professionally ambitious. I'd always been artistically ambitious. And when she asked me that, I was like, oh, let's just try it. The worst that can happen is we don't get a theater, and that's that. And we'd had such a great run at Playwrights Horizons, which is all I ever had aspired to. Was like, I thought the most I would ever get out of the show was like maybe a nice off-Broadway production. And so when I got that for me was the ceiling. We were like, had been making plans to go do an out-of-town tryout when COVID happened. And so then we're like, okay. And at that point, I was just sort of like, oh, well, my career's over. Theater's over. Oh, well.
That was nice.
That was nice. And then 2 months into the pandemic, I win the Pulitzer, which I was not thinking about at all.
Really?
Not at all, because it was a pandemic. Like,
I guess that's true.
It was just not on my
radar at that moment.
And so then that sort of reinvigorated interest in the show again. And so then once the pandemic began to sort of dissipate and people were able to come together again, we went to DC to do our out-of-town tryout at Woolly Mammoth, which was produced by Maria Goyanis, who was the director I had been working with and way back in the beginning.
Wild.
To put the show together. Yeah.
The monologue with
the songs. She was who my director was back in
That's
those early
crazy.
days. So it sort of came, it was a strange.
I mean, how much time, truly? Because
So that would have been around 2006. So
what, 2021?
21.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So then we did the show in DC. We got good reviews. And then in December of 2021, we found out we got the Lyceum. And then we were in Broadway that spring.
And many showered with Tony love.
Yeah, we got a lot of Tony nominations. We won 2. I won for Best Book, and we got Best Musical. And then we closed 9 months later.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, I love the show so deeply. Was Broadway not ready for it?
So,
like,
I mean,
what is why?
My personal opinion about it is that it actually makes all the sense in the world.
Why?
Because if the show continued to run and had run, that would suggest that there wasn't really a need for it to be there. That's the strange loop of it. The show is this downtown sensation. It's about this sort of character that you don't normally see, like who's like an outsider.
Yes.
So if he suddenly goes from outsider to insider
and is welcome in that space
welcome for years and years to come as this like commercial entity.
Is it that subversive after all?
Then what is he? What is the show? And so I actually, even though it's not typical for there to be like limited runs of musicals and it's like you lose a lot of money.
Here, there is in London.
Yeah, in Broadway. I'm like, to me, a 9-month run of A Strange Loop is actually kind of incredible, especially when you look at the runs of a lot of other shows.
Yeah.
Close instantly.
Anywhere from 2 weeks
right,
to,
you know?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like the greatest feeling in the world for it to close, but it felt like we had like done something kind of audacious.
You did.
And that people would talk about for years to come and that like had an impact.
Truly.
And that like didn't just become this like stale shadow of itself, because that's, I think, what could have happened is that it could have just become just sort of by the numbers and settled and not really not as vital as I believe it is. So it's a mixed bag for sure, but I actually sort of love that it closed.
That's wild. I mean, I love that POV so much as well.
Because think about it. I had ushered at The Lion King, which has been running on Broadway for
30 years.
5,000
years. Yeah, or 5,000.
And that's fine. That's great. But it's a super commercial mass market thing. But like A Strange Loop isn't that. It just isn't.
But people should see it.
They should see it. And a lot of people did see it.
True.
you know, and like you can watch the playwrights version at the Performing Arts Library at Lincoln Center. It has 2 cast albums are out, both the off Broadway and the Broadway version. It's starting to be done in other
Licensed.
places. I'm really proud of it.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of, and I don't think that everything needs to be a big Broadway
Forever.
smash
Mainstay.
forever.
Yeah.
I really don't. Because even the ones that are, like Phantom of the Opera is closed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it ran for, it's $1 million, zillion dollar IP. I don't need, like, I think would be weird for Strange Loop to be that, to be honest.
The theme park ride of
I
Strange
didn't think
Loop.
that in the beginning, and I wasn't thinking that when it was happening.
Right. But in
But like
hindsight.
when in hindsight, I'm like, oh right, that if its provocation is what it says it is,
Yeah.
then it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we sort of like zoom out on that a little bit? And like, what is your, do you have other Broadway aspirations given that information about A Strange Loop? And B, the balance of artistic integrity and commercialism on Broadway? And what is your ideal mix of like something super provocative with our Lion Kings?
So, you know, these days I'm somewhere between torn and very pessimistic about it because it's just Broadway is tough. I mean,
Yeah.
just economically, it's so tough.
It's brutal.
And it's tough because like the economics in this country are tough. And like the way that entertainment is consumed and culture and streaming.
Attention
and
spans.
attention span and all these things are creating a different kind of culture than
What Broadway is built
what
for.
Broadway came from.
Yeah.
It's so much is about consuming things on your phone.
Mhm.
Part of what I feel pessimistic about is just that, like, to me, it feels like what's becoming foreign is just even the idea that you should like go to a place and like really hear a story told to you, and that it's not just something that you just take for granted, and that it comes from a tradition of performance and of writing and of storytelling that's about this country, you know, humanity and like people sitting in the dark together and having communal experiences.
Yeah.
And that is important, that we have communal, in-person experiences where we all can watch a story unfold and it has some sort of perhaps universal resonance with us, you know, or that there's the potential for it. Even if you're like sitting there and you don't like what you're seeing, it's like you're all there together in real time.
Yeah.
And so trying to put something artistic, like really artistic, in this like very mass marketed commercial sphere, I think it's just becoming more and more difficult because you just have to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
And everything becomes about
dollars.
You have to sell those seats. And the seats have to be, you know, $500 a piece in order to meet your overhead. And because the rent is so expensive and the marketing is so expensive and the unions like need more money because the cost of living has gone up and health care costs have gone up. And so that's why things are so expensive, because everything else is so expensive. Yeah. So then when you go, oh, well, here's my little artistic expression. Like
where do we put it?
How can we afford that?
Yeah.
We need to keep people's butts in the seats. So I don't know. I like to believe that it's possible. And I do think that there are some examples of that, like a show that I'm like so ride or die for right now is Oh Mary.
Oh yeah.
Oh Mary to me is breaking box office records, and I think it has like true artistic merit. And so that's one model. It's not a musical. Plays are different than musicals. But like that's one bright spot in terms of,
and the capitalization was like,
and the capitalization, and so and I think because
it's manageable.
Kevin McCollum, he's like very, very savvy. And he's figured out how can I take something that has some artistic merit and keep the costs like low enough, but present something that's so good that a lot of people are willing to come and pay like top dollar to see it. So, you know, I think it's possible. As far as for me, I feel more pessimistic about that because the kinds of things that I would want to do on Broadway are so against the grain.
Yeah.
I mean, are so against the grain.
But we need it.
I understand that, but like people,
you're like, that's not my job.
People just don't want to see that. Like they just, some people want to see it. Some people want to do, but not enough people.
But maybe Showboat is the perfect marriage, just to bring it back.
Well, no, but Showboat, I wouldn't do a subversive take of Showboat. I would do my take on it, but like I love the songs of it. Yeah. I love the old-fashionedness of it.
1920,
I
whatever,
do.
8.
I really do.
Yeah.
If I had an opportunity to do something like that,
Yeah.
that did have that broad
Commercial appeal.
I would if I could find a way into it.
Right.
As far as like my pure sort of artistic ideas, I'm like, I'd rather do it in a smaller venue
Downtown,
where it's
off
gonna be more
Broadway
appreciated and it's gonna be less pressure
to
for it
make
to
the
have
dollar.
to be like the top grossing thing of all time.
That's totally fair. Does that feel like downtown? Does that feel like off Broadway, wherever?
Right
Immersive
now it's
space.
like
Are
off
you into
Broadway.
immersive theater?
What's that?
Immersive theater, is that a thing or not
I
really
I'm
for
not
you in your work?
I I haven't tried that. I mean, I've seen some stuff that I've been interested in, but like I don't have any ideas that are like immersive ideas. And we're trying something sort of different with my current show
Yeah.
Teeth at New World Stages. That's a commercial off Broadway run, and commercial off Broadway is like really tough too. But like one thing that I think that that the industry is sort of waking up to is that there needs to be an in between
100%.
of like nonprofit off Broadway and commercial on Broadway, and
Yes.
that middle ground is commercial off Broadway. But it's also economically tough too. So, but I I think we have a great show there as well. I think that there you can actually sort of price it so that like you can really target toward the audience that you want, and you're not beholden to having to get those like $500 seats. And I think that there's a hunger and a need for that, because I do
Yes.
think there's a lot of a younger audience that's
Yes.
coming up that does want to be able to go see shows, but
They feel
that won't,
outpriced.
that they feel outpriced out of. Yeah.
100%. Okay, so we have to talk about Teeth.
Yeah.
How long has this been in the works?
So Teeth weirdly has been in the works almost as long as A Strange Loop.
What? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So by the time I started working on Teeth, I've been working on Strange Loop 6 years by the time Teeth started. So I started working on Teeth in 2009, or like the initial idea.
Rock of Ages time.
Rock of Ages time, yeah. Well, no, it was right after that,
Yeah,
because I started working
2008.
at the ad agency. I approached my collaborator Anna K. Jacobs because I had seen the movie and I was really taken by.
Were you all in school together? How'd you know each other?
We both went to NYU, but we weren't there at the same time. I saw the movie and I was really taken by I was taken by the main character of Dawn O'Keefe. For those who don't know, Teeth is about a teen evangelical who is part of like a purity movement at her school, and she discovers that she has teeth in her vagina. And that sort of sets her on a course for some sort of crazy horror comedy in this movie that came out in 2007, written and directed by Mitchell Lichtenstein. I was taken by her story because so much of what her character was going through had to deal with sort of collision of religion and sexuality, just such a huge themes that I've always have written about in my work. I knew I wanted to adapt into a musical, but sort of recognized immediately that my music wasn't the right music for it. And I also felt it was important that there be a core female perspective in the storytelling. And so I approached Anna K. Jacobs, who had been at NYU a couple years after me and whose work I admired. She had a show that she had written called Pop about Andy Warhol that I loved, with her collaborator, Maggie Kate Coleman. I approached her with the film to see if she had any interest in it. So we watched it together and we started talking about what it could potentially be. And that sort of spun into 15-year collaboration that led up to us presenting it.
Did you have rights when you were like, this is the thing I want to do?
We didn't have rights initially, but we both had agents, and we
so you were like, there's a way.
Right. We approached our agents to see if they could go to the rights holder to see if we could potentially get the rights. And they approached Mitchell Lichtenstein, and he was like very receptive. He didn't charge us very much money for the initial set of rights. And then he since that moment has been so supportive of every step of the way.
Awesome.
He came to all our readings, and he would give us feedback, and he really was also very open to us making changes, because we sort of diverged from where he goes in the film. And he was always like so open to that.
Love that.
And so we love him for that. And so we just like over the years, on and off, while I was working on Strange Loop and Anna was working on other projects, we'll just come back to it and we would get different opportunities to revise. And the show was many different things before the version that people saw at Ferrets Horizons.
How did playwrights happen?
It happened very quickly and easily. There wasn't like a
long process and proposals back and forth. And
there was a process of us like working on it.
Sure.
But, like
to get it at playwrights.
Once they expressed interest, it was like on.
That's awesome.
We did a big workshop at the end of 2022. I think it was 2023.
Time is a vortex.
Yeah.
It's okay.
We pulled in our director, Sarah Benson, our choreographer, Raj Kelly, who was my longtime collaborator on White Girl in Danger and on A Strange Loop. And we just sort of went from there.
That's amazing. Who is the show for?
I think the show is definitely for women of all ages, but also anybody who grew up with a religious background. I think it's for young people in general who are interested in like sort of wild sort of explorations and provocations and camp and horror, but also like with a depth to it.
Yeah.
I think it's for more people than it might seem it's for, because it's so much of it has to do with the human body and sexuality and shame and a lot of feelings that a lot of people have felt at one point or another in their lives, but maybe had never had license to really talk about openly. And we sort of put it in this extreme background of this like very evangelical insular community. But there's something about that I think is weirdly universal, because unless you grew up with like very permissive parents or something, there's always somebody somewhere being like, don't do that, don't touch that, don't touch
Evangelical family in Texas. So
yeah, don't
I had a
don't,
purity
don't,
ring.
don't wait till you're married, like whatever it is. And the show is like very much about these people who have so much pressure put on them that eventually it's kaboom.
Fun.
And that's, I think, that's true to life. You put too much pressure on something and
100%.
it
Powder
creates like a
keg.
big explosion.
That's wild. Have you sat in the splash zone?
I haven't done a splash zone yet.
Michael.
I don't think I'm a splash zone person. It's so important to the show. I highly encourage everyone who
except
for me, who wants that experience to like go for it, because everybody who does it is so happy to have all the blood and water
all
and
over
stuff
them.
on them. I don't need that experience. But like, we price those tickets so that everybody who wants that can totally get into it.
I love it. Okay, so your gestational period for shows historically, well, how long was White Girl in Danger?
So
which
White Girl
I
in Danger
regret that
was the shortest.
Okay, how long was that process?
So White Girl in Danger was about 6 years, and that was partially because I just lucked into back-to-back developmental steps for it, whereas that wasn't the case for Strange Loop, and that wasn't the case for Teeth either. And so because I had those back-to-back developmental steps, I had a theater interest relatively early. It just sort of came together more quickly.
Is it licensable?
Not yet, no.
Okay, but gonna be, hopefully.
Maybe. White Girl in Danger was, I think, underappreciated, though I stand by her. Like, I'm a fierce mama protector of White Girl in Danger.
Yeah.
Always, I always will be. We got a cast album out of it. I'm exploring opportunities to continue working on it, but also adapting it for film.
Love.
Don't count her out yet.
I love that.
She's a soap opera
we love
heroine, villainous.
We need her.
And she's gonna climb up the side of that mountain one day. Just wait for her.
I love that. Okay, so 6-year gestational period and then like 15 to 20 years. Do you think that now that you have all these like accolades and awareness, like, do you think that will shorten gestational periods, or is it not even about that? Like, because you have so much more access now?
For me, I don't worry about it, because I just sort of feel very strongly that art takes the time that it takes.
Yeah.
Every piece takes the time that it needs to gestate and to grow and to, be presented. And so I will say, like, typically the pieces I've written take longer because they tend to be kind of weird, but you never know.
I mean, I think the gift of you as an artist is that you have such a vital voice, and we need it. Hopes and dreams for the future. Are you currently like building Broadway shows, off Broadway, wherever, film and TV, like where is your focus going?
I'm never like planning for Broadway. That's never, ever, ever
the thing
on my agenda. Because so much of that is ultimately dictated by other people.
Yeah.
Especially producers, and then demand and cost, like how much it costs to do it, like all that stuff. I am focused a bit more on TV and film pitches and stuff like that now, but I also have some other theater stuff that I am in the sort of the earliest stages of, which I haven't been in like the earliest stages of developing something for like 15 years.
Does it feel foreign or liberating?
It feels liberating because I don't have to worry about anything. I'm just creating, I'm just discovering, I'm just trying stuff out. I have this one idea that's actually, I got commissioned like a number of years ago by LCT3 on this idea I pitched to them that has now morphed into something else. I mean, it still has strains of what it was initially pitched as, but as the world has changed, it has changed. I don't worry about the moment because once you start focusing on the moment, it passes.
Yeah.
So everything that's happening is always changing.
Yeah.
And it's one reason why I don't, for example, ever think about what's happening currently politically, because there's no way to know what it's gonna be. But it's funny though, because what I've noticed is that a lot of people will just decide that something means something like political, and they'll decide that that's what I mean. They're like, this has to do with Trump, or this has to do with, Kamala, or this has to do with Israel, or whatever, like whatever it is. And I'm like, I can't operate that way because I have to kind of, as an artist and as an author, I have to take a little bit of a wider view, and I have to be able to see things from more than one position.
Tough.
And that's very difficult to do in the climate that we're in now, because so much is so polarized, so politicized, so tribal, so this side, my side, your side, and the right side. I call some people the voices of heaven. And it's a song I actually want to write for this new piece called The Voices of Heaven. Like these people who just sort of decide they know what's right and what's wrong.
Self-ordained.
And that nothing can contradict it. And that if you don't adhere to what they believe, that you are sort of like a suppressive person, like in the Scientology of it all. And I'm just like, I can't live like that. And I can't write or create like that. So I don't. So I don't worry about the moment. So I'm always just sort of exploring what I'm interested in, what's interesting to me, and hoping that I can get the audience to sort of see something bigger than whatever's trending on Twitter that day.
Can I ask you a few rapid fire questions?
Sure.
Favorite musical?
Chorus Line.
Oh, I love that answer. Would you ever perform again? Love. Dream collaboration partner that you haven't worked with yet?
Dee O'Connell.
Any dream like option, or is there like a dream project that you have your eyes on?
I really would like to do a Carpenter's Jukebox musical.
Michael White?
It's like been a deep dream for a while, but it's like tricky because of the estate. But
Oh, I want that.
yes,
Do you have a producer?
not yet.
Favorite line you've ever written?
Oh, so you think you're too good for HIV now? See, that's what you're not gonna do. Get your fat ass out of here and onto your phone. I noticed that booty hole of yours. Toe up and wore out by this time next year, or I'm gonna fuck on you myself. You're not gonna like it when I get through with you. You hear?
You were ready. That was in your pocket. That was amazing. Musical you wish you'd written?
Ooh, Hollies.
Oh, wow. That took me by surprise and made me forget the next question I was going to ask you. Are you superstitious? Do you do theater superstitions?
Not really.
Favorite terrible movie?
Favorite terrible movie?
Yeah.
I'll go with something easy. Showgirls.
Amazing. Favorite soap opera?
Ooh.
Is this like picking children?
Ooh. I think I'm gonna have to go with really tough. I think I'm gonna have to go with One Life to Live.
Nice.
Yeah.
Musical moment that makes you cry?
It started out as a song.
Did you see the revival multiple times? One
3
time?
times.
Yep. I love that. Favorite place to write?
My office.
Character you'd like to play that you haven't written?
Sweeney Todd. No, Mrs. Lovett.
Sick. That's great.
Yeah.
Artist who's influenced you the most?
Tori Amos.
Oh, love. Quick associations. I say a word, you say whatever else. Broadway.
Sucks.
Pulitzer.
Nice.
Detroit.
Home.
Strange Loop.
Baby.
Teeth.
Badass.
I'm obsessed.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you so much for talking with me. I am even more of a fan of you now, which I did not think was possible. And I'm so grateful to be able to chat. So thank you for joining the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for joining us on Game Changers. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next wonderful guest that we have on. Where can people follow you?
You can follow me on Instagram at The Living Michael Jackson, although I'm going to be taking an Instagram
Hiatus.
Starting tomorrow, I think.
Sensible.
And at the Living MJ on Twitter. And my website is thelivingmichaeljackson.com.
Which his website's amazing. It's like, it is actually representative of work and personality, which I feel like is very rare. It's a fun visit. Anyway,
I haven't updated it in a while, but
it's a treat.
There.
It's a treat. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks to our incredible guests for sharing their time and wisdom with us, to Tao Group and our gorgeous venue, The Highlight Room in New York City, and to you for joining us at And That's Showbiz. We have a lot more where this came from, so don't forget to subscribe, let us know what you thought, and what guests you want to see next in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.